everyone, and happy 2022. I am so excited to greet you all at the top of the new year. This is the first week of the year, and today is actually a very special day. It is Charles Sumner's birthday, the Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives namesake, and we are kicking off a very special segment, the first of several that we will have in the future, and it is called Ask Beverly. So with us today, we have Beverly Palmer, who is a historian and a Charles Sumner scholar. And so we are going to really just introduce the segment, have a kickoff. It is important to note, as we honor Senator Sumner's birthday today, January the 6th, that we are also kicking off the anniversary year for the founding of the Charles Sumner School. It was designed and completed in the fall of 1872. So we're excited and looking forward to a full year of celebrating the legacy of the Charles Sumner School, which of course includes the legacy of its namesake, Charles Sumner. So I want to welcome Beverly. Beverly, tell the people hello and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Okay, Kimberly. Well, we've known each other. We were talking before the recording about celebrating Sumner's 200th birthday back in 2011, anniversary of his birthday, and how there was a ceremony at the school, and we had a nice turnout. There were some school children there. Don Ritchie, who was the historian, retired historian of the Senate, spoke, and I spoke, and then you remember one of the other representatives from the DC public schools.
Dr. Jeanette Hostin Harris. I definitely want to lift her name. She was quite integral there. So I wanted to say too, and this is what I want to be clear and let the audience know, that over the past almost 14 years of my tenure at the Sumner, that I've had the privilege and the honor to get to know you and meet with you, even though you were living on the West Coast, which will tell us a little bit about, but we would have lunch and chat about your projects, about Sumner Museum, and about elevating Senator Sumner's name with the mission of what we do at the museum. So it's been, obviously the pandemic, we weren't able to see each other as regularly, but we have had a regular schedule of seeing each other each year. So yes, I just wanted to say that.
And we did make it. We made it in 2021.
That's right. That's right. So we were really only off about a year, but I have truly valued, our personal relationship we developed, and also professionally in working with you to elevate Senator Sumner's name as we work in the museum that is named after him and has been so for now almost 150 years. So we're going to talk about your relationship with the Sumner School, but I do want you to share a little bit with our audience about who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about how you came across Senator Sumner and became a scholar of his work, legacy.
Well, I'll start with my birthplace, which is Hillsboro, Ohio, a small town in southwestern Ohio. And I was there, graduate from the high school there, and then went on to college in Virginia. So it's kind of coming full circle that I'm now living in Arlington, Virginia. But I attended William and Mary and got my bachelor's degree in history there. And then after that, I kind of slowly migrated to the West Coast, and I went to Berkeley to go to grad school and got a master's degree in English. And while I was there in Berkeley, I met this grad student in economics, and he was getting his PhD. And I think this happens in many graduate schools. We got married, and he then was a diehard California, didn't want to leave the state. I hadn't really expected to spend 50 some years in California, but I ended up doing that. And he was teaching at Pomona College economics, which he did for many, many years. And I taught writing both at Pitzer College and Pomona College. And when I say writing, I don't mean the creative, although I think all writing is creative, but I was teaching students how to write better essays, helping them with their research papers, and just trying to spiff up their writing skills. And that was my day job. And then in 1970, I think it was 1973, I got an NEH grant to take a year off from teaching. And the grant was for Americans who'd spent time in Europe. And by that time, I was gravitating more towards history. And so I picked out a number of prominent Americans who had spent time in Europe. And I wanted to make it varied. So I had some women and I had men, and Thomas Jefferson was one of them. He was minister in Paris. And so I was going through his primary sources, and then discovered that Charles Sumner, and he was somebody I just knew as an anti-slavery leader, but he had spent much time in Europe. And I started reading his letters and found them so fascinating and such wonderful expression, the way he talked about being in Europe and the excitement and so forth. And the more I read about him and his eloquence, the more I became very interested in him. So I looked up where his papers were. They were at the Houghton Library at Harvard University. So I spent several weeks there going through the collection and trying to find out if anybody else had taken on this job of editing the letters, and it turned out no one had. And I got a grant from NHPRC to go there and catalog the letters. It's a huge collection. When we produced the microfilm edition, it came to 85 reels. Now, not all those papers were at the Houghton Library, because Sumner wrote to people all over, well, not quite the world, but many people in Britain and France. So we had letters that I tracked down from his recipients in Britain and France. And so it turned out that we produced a microfilm edition, the 85 reels. And then from then I wanted to move on to a hardbound edition of his letters. And so thanks to some more grants from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which I think has funded a lot of really important editing projects, but we produced the selected letters of Charles Sumner. So here's the volume 2 of the 2-volume edition.
Very nice.
And so that took me to documentary editing, which is just a profession that I've enjoyed, and have edited the letters and speeches of Thaddeus Stevens and Lucretia Mott. So those are 2 other 19th century reformers whose papers I have dealt with, and it's been a wonderful experience.
That is really amazing, Beverly, because as I've explained to everyone, I've known you now for almost 14 years, and I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't aware of your trajectory and how you came across Charles Sumner, but I think it is astounding and quite interesting that you, at the beginning of your career, what you were doing was helping students be able to write well and articulate themselves. And then you connected with these individuals in history, and through your work have elevated their writing eloquence, which I'm sure made them impactful, right, and as far as their mission and what they were doing. So in concentrating on Senator Sumner, as we're honoring him on his birthday, in discovering him through his writing, what did you find most interesting about his writing, about the man? Why is Senator Sumner so significant? I think he's very foremost and was celebrated as such by contemporaries. But I think it's also very interesting that by 1973, as you mentioned, no one had transcribed or edited his letters. Someone who we've talked about went through he deliberately preserved his archives, and you can share about that. I know we talked about it in the past, but yes, why is Charles Sumner so significant as a historical figure? And we'll talk more about how he connects in contemporary times, but what was so illuminating and exciting about your discovery of him through his writing?
Well, his breadth of interest. He corresponded with artists, with writers. It's just amazing of the breadth of religious figures, he just wrote everybody, and everybody wrote him. And as you were saying, Kimberly, he saved all his papers. As a matter of fact, he even paid clerks to very carefully paste these letters. And one of the first jobs that happened at the Houghton Library was that Grant paid for, or maybe the Houghton Library, I think, actually paid to have people remove those letters from these bound volumes, from these scrapbooks, which were just, you know, an enormous number of scrapbooks.
Wow.
And then they could be microfilmed. And so that was the first thing that we were doing was, they'd already been removed. And then I had two helpers and we were cataloging them. And I spent a wonderful, wonderful time at the Houghton Library up on the 4th floor with two very helpful assistants, Bill Eppard and Elizabeth Elkine, and they were also helping me. And we got these letters ready for filming. And so I think I've kind of sidetracked from your what interested us in Sumner, but it was mostly, I mean, like, for example, the Houghton Library did not know that they had 2 letters from Charles Dickens. And we were cataloging the letters, and all of a sudden, here comes Charles Dickens, 2 letters. And I remember going downstairs and telling the head of the manuscript, "You've got 2 Charles Dickens letters." And they said, "What?" And I said, "Yes." So this was one of the exciting parts of this job. Other people would find it very dreary to go cataloging these letters, but not for me, because you just never knew what you were going to uncover.
Right.
As far as Sumner's, I really get tired of trying to tell people that he was more than someone who was beat up in the Senate. But when I say Charles Sumner, they'll say, "Oh, was that guy that got beat up in the Senate?" And
all the
said,
time.
"Yes."
I get it all the time too.
Yes. And I said, but he was more than that. He recovered from the beating. He came on to live through the Civil War, a passionate opponent of slavery, just absolutely. And that was way before his beating, but it was one of the reasons of the beating was he was attacking a senator and gave a speech, and then a relative of that senator, who was a congressman, was the one who attacked Charles Sumner. But he was more than that. And so I have to keep saying he was for equal rights. He was went beyond anti-slavery, but just was really strong on trying to get equal rights for everybody. And so was instrumental with the amendments after the Civil War, the Reconstruction amendments, and he wrote about it so vividly and so just so determined. He was so determined that these things should happen and must happen. And he just had a very strong, courageous drive that was, he believed in himself, and maybe some people will say a little too much, because he was pretty proud person, but he also believed in it, the cause, and it was a cause that we all espouse, and we still are working on that today, aren't we?
Still working.
Yeah.
So again, I was quite astounded to learn too, again, in the 1970s, that no one had edited or transcribed his letters. Do you feel like he had fallen into obscurity? You know, he was quite well known, given the fact that the Charles Sumner School was named for him as a national landmark. We have documents that show evidence of just how revered he was, especially within the African American community. So what are your thoughts about kind of over now kind of this 45-year span that you discovered him, about kind of his popularity or people knowing about him? Because I've encountered quite a few people that don't really know Charles Sumner. I've met people from Massachusetts that don't know Charles Sumner. There are a lot of people that say, like you mentioned, oh, he was the one that was beaten on the Senate floor, and it does get quite old, you know, and explaining to people like, that's not who he was. You know, there's a lot more to him than that one incident, you know,
Absolutely.
traumatic incident, but nonetheless, he was quite prolific, quite vocal and well known. And as you said, and because of you, we have these edited letters to go back and see just how eloquent and how much he wrote and documented his life. So what are your thoughts about him and his waning popularity or knowledge about him in general society and in American history as a figure?
Well, first of all, I should correct it myself, because I said there was no edition. There was a 19th century 4-volume edition of, it was called Memoir and Letters. And this was by sort of an acolyte to Sumner. It was somebody who was an admirer of his and collected. And so that was those 4 volumes were the ones that everybody who was doing any work on Sumner, and that includes David Donald, who was the premier biography. I believe his first volume won a Pulitzer Prize, but they all used the Pierce edition.
From the 19th century, right?
19th century, yeah. And it was excerpts. So it was there would be a little bit of prose, and then there'd be an excerpt, and then he would go on. And of course, it wasn't comprehensive. It was very selective. And of course, Pierce was dealing with whatever he could lay his hands on. And it was also totally uncritical. It was just Sumner was this wonderful person and so forth, which he was in many ways, but it was too much hagiography and not enough. Well, this is the man, warts and all. And any documentary editor is going to say, we're not selecting only the letters that make our subject look good. We're giving you everything. Yes. And so anyway, it was time for an edition. And I must say, I'm always pleased when people tell me that that edition has helped their work, because that's the goal of any documentary editor. And so to answer your question about Sumner, I think you have to just keep bringing his name up, because a lot of these people, everybody remembers Abraham Lincoln. Everybody remembers the generals who fought in the Civil War. And I remember being very disappointed in Ken Burns' Civil War series, because it was a wonderful series. I mean, the way he put together, the way he dealt with the everyday soldiers fighting and so forth. But he neglected what was going on in the Congress, and how a lot of this couldn't take place. Lincoln alone could not free the slaves. Absolutely. And Lincoln alone could not legislate and give civil rights to Blacks. And so the attention needs to be, and it's not as flamboyant, it's not as jazzy, as signing some papers. It's that slow legislative work that takes, and it's been very interesting to follow, how during the Civil War, a few more rights, another little passage of legislation working its way till finally the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But I think that partly because legislation isn't as exciting as commanding an army on the field or signing proclamations. And so these legislators get not so much ignored, but just sort of pushed to the side. Right.
Now, yes, the legislation is important because that's what makes the laws and changes things within society. What are some of the other things, like actions, that Sumner did outside of Congress? Can you speak to any other actions that he took to further this cause?
Well, he was known for his speeches, and he was eloquent. The first speech he gave was in 1845. He was very much a pacifist, and he offended a lot of people. He gave a speech on the 4th of July, I think in the Boston Commons, but someplace. And it was a speech in favor of peace. And he not so much downgraded, but sort of ignored the Revolutionary War patriots. And that annoyed, of course, a lot of the Boston Brahmins. So he was criticized for that. And people said, who is this crazy guy, And he wasn't afraid. And he just kept on going with what he believed in. And then one reform, he was interested in prison reform, school reform. And then all along slavery. And then, of course, in the 50s, he was elected to the Senate, and that's where he could join other radicals, is what they were all known as, and work. And it was slow. It couldn't happen overnight. And so
Right.
he was working on this, and he was one of the ones who believed during the Civil War that, yes, it was horrible that all these people, these soldiers were being killed in all these bloody battles. But on the other hand, he was afraid if the war ended too soon, slavery would not be abolished. And he knew that we had to keep fighting, and it has to come to its culmination, and which it did, of course.
Right. So you have explained very well kind of the breadth and depth of Senator Sumner and his work and legacy. And so that brings me to the Charles Sumner School, which was completed in 1872 and named for Senator Sumner. It was an intentional national landmark to honor his legacy. So we're doing our work by having this edifice,
right,
still standing, active space that is dedicated
right,
to preserving the history of public education in DC,
yeah,
with an emphasis on the evolution of Black educational opportunities in DC. And you know, it's quite interesting. Senator Sumner was pioneering and really had this radical idea of schools post-slavery, they should be integrated. That's quite radical. And also, out of the bondage of slavery, educational institutions were set up all over the South as well. And of course, Washington, D.C., Congress passed an act to provide for public education immediately after the abolition of slavery. So 1863 specifically, slavery was abolished, as you know, 9 months ahead of the Emancipation Proclamation.
right.
So in 1872, we have this brand new edifice named for Senator Sumner. What do you know about Charles Sumner's involvement, about, you know, any thoughts or feelings? Was he at the dedication? What do we know about the Charles Sumner School in Washington, D.C., our site, being named for Senator Sumner, and what he knew about it?
Well, I'm sad to say that we have no reactions from Sumner. First of all, it's only through, and I guess we'll get to Dick Hurlbut at some point, but Dick Hurlbut was instrumental in my starting my connection with the Sumner School. And I had made many trips to DC, probably walked up and down past the Mayflower Hotel, DuPont Circle, saw that beautiful building, and just never really stopped and said, what is that building and why is it there? Like many people, but Dick Hurlbut is the one who was, I guess you'd say, instrumental in saving the building.
Absolutely.
Am I going too far with that?
No, you're not. No.
And he tracked me down because he knew I was editing these letters. And of course, that's a little harder to do in the not 150 years ago, but
not quite.
Yeah, but because without the internet, but he found me and he said, let's get together. And so that's how I became acquainted with the Sumner School. And he said, well, we have this dedication coming up, and can you go through the papers and see if you can find anything about Sumner? And I just ransacked everything, and I did find the invitation in the Charles Sumner papers. So it's very clear that he received that invitation. And as a matter of fact, Dick then included that in this booklet that's came out. Yeah. And so the invitation is there, and it just says, we are invite you, and it's he says, extending to you an invitation to be present at the dedication of the Sumner School building, and it's been named in honor of yourself to be a lasting monument to your memory, believing as they do that you are the best exponent of the worth of a thorough education. Wow. And it's signed by W Richardson, who was the secretary of the Board of Education. And so anyway, at least I had that.
Can you show us? Can you show us that invitation to our viewers so they can see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little,
And
yeah.
Dick
Mhm.
Hurlbut very, I think appropriately included that. It's right at the very beginning of the program that was published for the dedication.
Mhm.
Sumner was very ill, and he was ailing. He died March of 74. So this is the fall of 72, but he was not in good shape and left for Europe on actually, he left, see, the Sumner School was dedicated on the 2nd. Sumner sailed from Boston for Europe, and this is where he often went. He went after the beating too.
Okay.
Things got bad or his health was failing. He had all these friends, he had all this support. And so he was very concerned about his health. And unfortunately, he must have had some reaction because he saved everything, but I was unable to find anything about this.
Okay.
And the only, for me, heartwarming discovery was to learn that Frederick Douglass had attended the dedication. And he wrote about it in his newspaper, the New National Era. And I'm just going to read a little quote from his write-up, because this says something about what that building meant in 1872. He said the Charles Sumner School is an exemplification of the rapid progress the District of Columbia has made in the elevation of its colored citizens. So clearly he recognized it. And
yes.
What Sumner thought about it, I mean, here's this huge, beautiful building, how you could not pay attention to it, but we don't have anything in writing. So I'd like
so
to make up some, but I have to be honest and say we don't have his reaction.
We don't have it, but it's interesting, you know, because we do know, just for the audience, that Charles Sumner and Frederick Douglass were close friends.
They were
very, very close friends. So it's very interesting. I wonder, and there are many other buildings named for Senator Sumner. So I just wonder how he felt about that. I think it's interesting.
Oh, he would have loved it.
Yes.
He was very proud. He thought the more statues, the better. You know, he was quite an arrogant person. And
Yes.
I mean, you could say rightfully so. And I think he annoyed people, but no, and there were Sumner schools all over the country. You know, out in Kansas, there you'd find Charles Sumner this and Charles Sumner that,
which is very interesting because he didn't build them. This is evidence of how people felt about him. You know,
yeah, and the letters that would pour in, particularly after the beating, just huge. I mean, I forget how many microfilm reels take the letters that poured in, and then he got into a very ugly, and I think ugly is not too strong a word. Argument with President Grant, and that kind of marred his reputation at the end, because he would not support U.S. Grant for re-election. And that's when he broke with Douglass too, because Douglass couldn't understand why he would do that, but he was against Grant for other reasons. And so I think he had disappointed a lot of his black followers, because he gave a lot of speeches about how awful Grant was and how they should all vote for Horace Greeley. And so it was a disappointment, I think, then too. And maybe he realized that. I don't know.
Well, you know, that speaks to the complexity of us as human beings, you know. It's evolution of thought, changes, you know, all of that. That's why I thought it was interesting. You talked about the 19th century volume was more laudatory, you know, of the figure, but we do know, and you know better than us, how complex of a figure that he was. I do want to say this because we're about to wrap up soon. You mentioned Richard Hurlbut. So for our viewers, Richard Hurlbut is the founding director of the Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives. And as we have Beverly Palmer sitting here, right here to testify, he found her. And that's
he did. And he was such an intrepid person. Oh my gosh, he was
scouring for all of the resources and everything to
did.
support this building. That's why I'm so honored to, you know, to fill these big shoes and continue the
Right.
legacy. It's because of him that he was very integral. There are other people, of course, but he was the major force
Oh,
behind
amazing.
saving the Sumner
Yes.
School. Yep, and making sure that the legacy pushed forth. So that's why it's important that we have this segment, that we do raise the memory and legacy of Charles Sumner. And I want to kind of close this out in talking about his legacy. As we sit here today on January 6, 2022, it is 1 year since the historic, as has been called, insurrection on the Capitol. It happened last year today, and it happened on Charles Sumner's birthday. We
Right.
talked about how it's potentially, you know, Charles Sumner has not been as well known as I believe he should be based on what he accomplished. And I thought it was very interesting that in all of the reporting, is tons of it, there were news journalists everywhere last year on January 6th, documenting what was happening. And one of the most powerful and now famous captures, and I think you have it, Beverly, is of a
I have
gentleman
it right
carrying,
here.
yes, he's carrying a Confederate flag
If
in the
you
US
will,
Capitol. And look
if
who's in the
you will,
background.
I think almost everybody will recognize that.
Yes, that's a portrait.
And what your
portrait of
eye
Charles Sumner.
goes to right away is the Confederate flag. And
Yep.
listening to the president earlier this morning, he mentioned the fact that and maybe this is not exactly the first time, but he said there were Confederate flags inside the Capitol for
Right.
the first time. Well, there it is. And now here, right behind there, is the portrait of Charles Sumner. So the
Yes.
juxtaposition of this guy and his Confederate flag and Charles Sumner's portrait it's just so painful. It's just painful is the word that I used. I wrote a letter to the Washington Post thinking they should print it, but they didn't. But I sent it around to a lot of people anyway. And it's just a very painful irony that here's somebody who was fought for human rights, equal rights, and there he is, and there's the Confederate flag.
So Beverly, you used the word painful in you know, seeing that image, but I want to kind of challenge you. Let's use our imagination. That, you know, perhaps in that moment, Charles Sumner's presence, you know, he's always in the Capitol, that portrait, but how he kind of revealed himself. We're talking about that. What do you think Charles Sumner's message would be today? You know, if he saw what was going on, what do you think that he would have to say about all of this? And or what do you think he would do? You know, if he were active in Congress, that might be. What are your thoughts about that?
I think he would say, don't give up.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how in the darkest days of the Civil War, he was always hopeful. He was always saying, keep fighting. And kind of in a way, the president echoed that this morning, listening to his remarks. And Sumner, he was determined, and he was not going to be dissuaded. He was not going to be defeated. He was going to just say, this is too important for our country. He believed in our country, and we can't give up. We have to keep hoping.
That's
and fighting.
Yes, I love it. That's perfect. I think that's a perfect point to end today with our first segment of Ask Beverly. You know, I view that image as a reminder, as you say, Beverly, if Senator Charles Sumner were alive today, that he would say, stay optimistic and hopeful and keep pushing. So with that, I want to thank you for the first segment. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just thank you, Kimberly, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Charles Sumner and to once again bring him to the attention of all of us, because like you and I agree, he should not be forgotten.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining for the first segment. We'll have information about how you can connect with Beverly if you have questions about Senator Sumner, our namesake, as we will be celebrating him, celebrating the legacy of Charles Sumner, celebrating the legacy of the building and the history that's connected to it. But I just want to close out by letting you know that we'll be talking about other things. Beverly, I had a ton of questions, but I had to keep it in. We went for a while, but I want to know about Charles Sumner's friends, those that he connected with. You know, I want to hear about reflections from you about ways in which that you consult the letters over the years or have consulted the letters over the years, and also your other projects about other reformers as well. So we're going to have you back. It was a joy to have you with us this first time, and I'm excited to keep this going. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.